The herb that we are tasting and discussing today is Jing Jie. And Jing Jie is typically believed to be an herb that releases the exterior. And I think Jing Jie is such a phenomenal example of an herb to understand the yin and yang qualities because it is so young, it is so light. Everything about Jing Jie kind of comes up like this, which explains why it would be an herb to unblock and to treat surface pathogens. So we're going to get an opportunity to talk about and look at Jing Jie today. Now, Jing Jie is an herb that was classified in the Shenrong Bancao as a middle herb, a zhongping. And so herbs that are middle herbs, middle level herbs from the Shenrong Bancao, that immediately tells us a little bit of something about the herb. Remember that the Shenrong Bancao divided herbs into three categories: upper herbs, middle herbs, and lower herbs. And so upper herbs are things that we can use every day in a long time and large quantities without hurting the person, which inherently means that they're milder, they're more like supplements, food substances. We can't expect profound, loud change for them with these herbs unless we're using a very heavy-handed dose. Middle herbs, however, are herbs that we're told we want to use when the patient is starting to have symptoms. So we use these herbs to hold back illness and to start to shift what's going on in the body. We do expect these herbs to be powerful enough to make a change. And the Shenrong Bancao also tells us that we want to stop these herbs when the symptoms improve. So looking at Jing Jie in that paradigm of it being a middle level herb, we know we should expect changes relatively quickly for our patient, and we know that we also want to stop its application when the patient has improved. Now, anytime we're talking about an herb, there's a couple of very important things we want to talk about. And that first one is the Shenrong Bancao, or that paradigm of, is it an upper, middle, or level or lower level herb? The second thing we want to talk about is the flavor and the nature. And a lot of herbs, as are with foods and vegetables and fruits, they're going to be different based on the harvest, based on the location, even based on the drying, processing, those kinds of things of herbs. And so when we look historically at what people have said and we see that there's differences, it's not necessarily that one person is right and others are wrong, but it is reflective of the plant that that scholar had at that moment. And thus they're writing about it in that format. And so most everyone has agreed that Jing Jie is very acrid. Even if we just open this jar, the Jing Jie is so pungent. It's almost kind of a spicy, light something that immediately goes to my nose and to my eyes and to my head. And so that acrid light property is something that everyone has written about. But a few scholars have said that Jing Jie is bitter as well. And so we're going to examine that today. And most of the scholars are saying that it's a little bit warm in quality. So that's also something that we want to experience for ourselves, because many herbs are said to be warm natured substances, but when we take them, they may or may not palpably warm us. And that's important to know. If a book says an herb is warm, but when we drink it, we aren't thoroughly warmed, then we would need to combine that herb with something else, maybe some ginger, some cinnamon, something that does palpably warm the body, if warming is a direct focus of your treatment. So those are all things that we can talk about with Jing Jie. The third aspect of herbs that I always want to talk about when we do these single tastings is the yin and yang quality. And the yin and yang quality of the herb encompasses its flavor and its nature. Is it a yin flavored herb or yang flavored herb? But it also encompasses its plant quality. So here I have Jing Jie Sui. The Sui means that character is actually kind of the tassels, the corn, the ear of the corn, this part that kind of comes off the top of the corn, the wheat chaff. And so you can see that here with the Jing Jie Sui. This is the very top, most light, most yang, most end portion of the Jing Jie. So the Jing Jie grows quite a lot like basil and even has these kind of tower seed pods and fluffy stuff. Our teacher would always prescribe Jing Jie Sui, and so that is our prescription habit. We don't have Jing Jie and Jing Jie Sui in the pharmacy. We just have this one herb, just this Jing Jie Sui, this is that third character. So it's the lightest, the most yang, the most thin, the most able to flow around the body. And so when we look at Jing Jie, what's amazing is it has a yang flavor, which is acrid. It has a very yang nature, which is it's said to be warming. It has a very yang light plant quality. It's super light and fluffy and has no density. And even you can see the bottom of our jar here, lots of that little powdery top stuff has fallen to the bottom. So it's yang and light and thin and yang in flavor and yang in quality and yang in nature. So we can expect from an herb that we say is yang, that it's going to act in a yang quality, up and out and really to the surface. And so before we've even tasted Jing Jie, we've smelled it, we've looked at it, we really can understand we would expect it to do this based on its qualities. I haven't even opened a book yet, and yet we can understand that from looking at this plant. Then we want to match that common sense of looking at the plant, smelling it, inspecting it with what scholars have said through time. So in terms of the yin and the yang quality, the Neijing outlines for us what we know about yin and yang. And it says that light qi, herbs with light qi, should create a dispersing or a moving on the surface. And we expect that with Jing Jie. Zhang Yuansu says that Jing Jie has this very light, thin, floating qi, that it's able to do this kind of rising and affecting the surface of the body. Wang Haogu talks about this acrid quality is actually an herb for the qi aspect of the liver channel, that because it is so light and acrid, it's able to, he uses the word even seek out the liver qi, arrive at the location of where liver qi is and make sure that the liver qi moves. So when we think about herbs in terms of their flavor, we can think about all of the things we would expect with an acrid flavored herb. And that's a little bit different than memorizing release the exterior, because acridity is going to create movement. And some of the scholars are talking about that with Jing Jie, creating movement within the qi, unblocking even blood and things that are stuck because of this warming and aromatic and acrid quality. When we read through the notes from the scholars, we are going to hear a lot of words about unblocking wind, about releasing the exterior, and that is definitely what we're finding in English language books in terms of our bullet points. The Yaoxing Fu that was written in the Jin and the Yuan dynasties in about somewhere between the 1100s to 1300s, this book talks about that it is the acrid flavor and warm nature of Jing Jie that's able to kind of send all the way, reach all the way to the surface to unblock and disperse wind, but it can also penetrate into sores and rashes, dissolving ulcers. So it's getting that flow all the way up to the surface and then getting inside things that are blocked and even sort of festering on the skin in terms of rashes and sores. Some of the scholars are also talking about the fact that later in history, Jing Jie became blackened. And so Jing Jie Tan, or blackened charred Jing Jie, was applied for stopping bleeding. And that's something that we want to look at, because obviously blackening an herb that's very light and acrid and aromatic, that tends to go like this in the body, the charring and the carbonizing of an herb is going to create this. When we use herbs that are blackened, even stir-fried, it slows down their action. It makes them like this. If you ate something poisonous and called a poison control center, the initial advice would be to have some sort of charcoal, activated charcoal, to absorb that toxicity, the poisons in the stomach. And so blackening an herb has that similar absorbing, carbonizing, stopping flow, stopping bleeding. And that inherently is quite an opposite reaction to yang, light, unblock, and flow. I believe it's even Chen Shouyan here. Chen Shouyan is always a fun person to look at, because Chen Shouyan likes to kind of give a hard time to people that he sees are making mistakes. And he says that the doctors of his time that are stir-frying this herb until blackened, they are taking an herb that inherently has a very light, acrid, aromatic, warm qi, and you're drying it. But the qi becomes so dry It's then unable to reach any of these areas where it previously was helpful. It also, the blackening tempers this acrid flavor, and therefore there's no dispersing property left in the herb. And Chen Shouyan says that the doctors of his time are saying that Jing Jie Tan, this blackened Jing Jie, is an excellent herb to be used frequently postpartum. And Chen Shouyan says, this is extremely ignorant. So we have to be very clear on our application, as taking any herb and cooking it is going to change it. We could cook something with salt or vinegar or ginger or honey. We could soak it in alcohol. We can increase its properties. We can decrease its properties, but each treatment needs to be accurate for the condition that we're meeting. So today what we're tasting is, I brewed 20 grams of Jing Jie in a double-walled thermos overnight, and this liquid is what resulted from it. There's more than this liquid, but this is what I have to taste this morning. And the smell is coming to me from here. It is very minty, very aromatic, and not even getting it too close to my face, I can smell that kind of lightness. It's interesting to me that the color of the Jing Jie is so thick and kind of brown and not that light. And so we can see we're really able to get a lot of kind of good juju out of the herbs by soaking it in. This was soaked in boiling water for 12 hours, which is different than if you were to cook it on the stove. And if you wanted to cook something like Jing Jie on the stove in a stove pot in a more traditional cooking method, Jing Jie would typically be an add at the end herb. You may not want to cook it for a long time because you would deepen its flavors. You may make it more yin natured by cooking it longer and boil away its essential oils. You may not have that same light acridity by that. So we can investigate if our long steep is inherently getting in the way of some of the lighter qualities of the Jing Jie. So as I said, in terms of flavor and nature, it's very aromatic, and it's light and thin and a little peppery and minty when I smell it. The liquid is very full-bodied. It doesn't taste like a tea. It really tastes quite condensed. The flavor went immediately into my tongue. It's a little tingly, a little bit like having a cup of mint tea that maybe the tea bag of the tea soaked a very long time. It has a thickness to it, and the flavor actually has kind of settled into my tongue but is staying there. So in this lightness and the yang of this aroma, it actually has a fair amount of kind of yin strength because the flavor is so strong. Now, while I am drinking this warm at the moment, it does have a sense of it kind of filling in my face, my mouth, my tongue, my head does have a feeling of a little bit more warmth. It will be fun throughout the day and the week, this week in tasting Jing Jie, to see how much palpable thermal change we get from this one herb. And so that is, again, something that we want to consider when we're treating the surface. If the surface is really blocked and the person is very cold and shivering, Jing Jie certainly has that aromatic and powerfulness to get up. Is it also going to create that powerful thermal property? And we just have to evaluate how cold is our patient, and do they need a lot of ginger with it, maybe some scallions, those kinds of things. Everything about the Jing Jie right now is still very much here. I've had a half a cup of this. I don't feel fluid, the effect from the flavor in my throat at all. I don't feel it in my chest. I don't even feel it in my stomach, even though I've had this powerful liquid going in my stomach. It seems like it's very much staying, even almost kind of feel it in my nose. Very commonly when someone is drinking Jing Jie, they will then smell like Jing Jie. Their sweat will smell like Jing Jie. It's something that you can smell throughout the day, not just while they're drinking it. So it has that ability to go in and kind of stay light and stay in the skin, and even in that kind of that toli, this area of the surface and the pores and the flesh around that. So this Jing Jie, I'm going to say on a scale of 1 to 10, it's acridity, it's lightness, it's that aroma. It's really a very fragrant aroma, more like the acrid of mint, that it's not that same spicy as ginger. It's a 9 out of 10. It's really obvious, and it's very light, and it's really staying this up. In terms of its yang-naturedness, I'm also going to give that maybe a 9 out of 10. Everything about this action of this plant, even with us steeping it overnight, has a very up and out. I'm starting to feel almost a tingle on the outside of my shoulders here from that, as if my circulation or even my pores are kind of starting to go, what's happening up here? And that's 20 grams of Jing Jie. I feel like this, tasting it today, this is a dose that I would expect if someone came in and had kind of mild, the weather's changing, it's starting to be fall, slight tight neck. The last few nights are the first nights sleeping with a hat or waking up in the morning and needing to have more clothes on, a sweater in the morning. I think that 20 grams is a very appropriate dose for that level of weather change and starting to have kind of stiffness. And then we just have to tone it up or down based on the symptoms that we're seeing in our patients. So I invite you to find some Jing Jie, brew it, and see what you think.